Sometimes the smallest decision you make on an ordinary Tuesday can quietly change the rest of your life. The wind swept through downtown Chicago with the sharp bite of early November, carrying scraps of yellow leaves along the sidewalk like little pieces of forgotten stories. Elena Bennett pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of the neighborhood grocery store, balancing a paper bag against her hip while checking the time on her phone. It was almost 5 o'clock. In less than 40 minutes, the after-school tutoring program would start, and 3 of her students would be waiting for her at the community center. The sky overhead was already turning gray, the city preparing for another cold evening. Around her, people moved quickly, heads down, rushing toward trains, buses, apartments, and lives that rarely slowed down long enough to notice anything outside themselves. Elena had always been different that way. She noticed things. The elderly man struggling with grocery bags, the teenager crying quietly on a bus bench, the single mother counting dollar bills before entering a pharmacy. Maybe that was why she became a teacher. Maybe that was why her students trusted her. Or maybe it was simply because nobody had paid much attention when she was growing up. As she crossed the corner near a crowded bus stop, something dark caught her eye near the curb. A wallet, black leather, expensive. The kind of wallet that looked like it belonged in a luxury boutique rather than lying forgotten beside a storm drain. Most people walked past without seeing it. One man actually stepped over it without looking down. Elena stopped. For a moment she simply stared. The city moved around her in a blur of headlights and footsteps. Then she crouched down and picked it up. The leather felt surprisingly soft in her hand. Heavy too. She glanced around, expecting someone to come running back looking panicked. Nobody did. The crowd continued flowing around her like water around a stone. She opened the wallet carefully, hoping to find a driver's license. What she found made her blink. There was more cash inside than she had seen in months. Neatly arranged $100 bills filled one side. Several credit cards rested in custom leather slots. A business card embossed with silver lettering sat behind them, but there was no driver's license visible, no obvious contact information. Elena immediately closed the wallet. The money wasn't hers. The thought never even crossed her mind. Her first instinct was simply to return it. She looked toward the nearby police station 2 blocks away. That would probably be the safest option. Then her phone buzzed. A text from one of her students. "Save me a seat." A small smile crossed her face. She typed back a quick response before slipping the phone into her pocket. As she started walking toward the police station, she didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street. She didn't notice the man sitting inside, and she certainly didn't notice the security camera mounted above a nearby jewelry store capturing everything. Less than a mile away, inside a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River, several people were searching frantically for the same wallet now resting inside Elena's coat pocket. Tension hung in the air of the executive conference room. Phones rang. Voices stayed low but urgent. Nobody wanted to be responsible for losing something that belonged to Rafael Marino. The man himself stood quietly near the floor-to-ceiling windows, 34 years old, impeccably dressed, calm enough to make everyone else nervous. The fading sunlight reflected against the river below while he listened to updates from his security team. No one had found the wallet, not yet. Rafael's expression never changed, but the missing wallet mattered for reasons nobody in the room fully understood. It wasn't the money, it wasn't the cards, it was something else hidden inside, something he had carried for years. Back on the street, Elena entered the police station lobby. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. She approached the front desk and explained what had happened. The officer thanked her and accepted the wallet. It should have ended there, an ordinary act of honesty. A wallet returned, a forgotten moment in a busy city. But as Elena turned to leave, another officer approached carrying the wallet. "Ma'am," he called. She stopped. "There's no identification inside. Did you happen to notice anything unusual?" Elena hesitated. Then she remembered the silver business card. The officer checked again. Empty slot. The card was gone. Somehow, somewhere between the sidewalk and the police station, it had disappeared. A small crease formed between Elena's eyebrows. She was certain she had seen it. The officer thanked her anyway. She stepped back outside into the cold evening air, assuming the matter was finished. It wasn't, because at that exact moment in a security control room 20 stories above the city, a technician froze a surveillance video and zoomed in on a single frame. The image wasn't perfect. Rain speckled the camera lens. Pedestrians crossed through the shot, but there she was, a young teacher in a navy coat bending down to pick up the missing wallet. The technician looked toward Raphael. The room fell silent, and for the first time all afternoon the powerful man finally smiled. "Find her," he said quietly. Unfortunately for Elena Bennett, she had no idea that a complete stranger had just begun searching for her. The most dangerous moments in life rarely feel dangerous when they begin. Elena Bennett forgot about the wallet before she even reached the community center. The evening passed the way most of her evenings did. She helped a fourth grader practice reading aloud. She explained fractions to a boy who would rather be playing basketball. She stayed 20 extra minutes after the program ended because one student needed help finishing a science project. By the time she finally stepped back onto the street, the city had transformed. The rush hour crowds were gone. Storefronts glowed softly beneath the darkening sky. Cold air drifted off Lake Michigan, slipping between the buildings and turning every breath into a small cloud. Elena adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag and started toward the train station. Her feet ached. Her paycheck was not arriving until Friday. Her apartment heater made noises that suggested it might not survive another winter. In other words, life was completely normal. What she did not know was that less than 10 miles away, a team of private investigators had already assembled a detailed profile of her life. The conference room inside Merino Global Logistics overlooked the river. Most people who entered the building assumed it belonged to another successful businessman expanding his empire across the Midwest. Very few understood how much influence Raphael Merino truly possessed. Even fewer understood how carefully he guarded his privacy. The giant monitor on the wall displayed a paused image from the surveillance footage. Elena's face appeared slightly blurred but recognizable. A senior security analyst stood beside the screen. Her name is Elena Bennett, 26 years old, elementary school teacher. No criminal record, no significant debt. Volunteers twice a week at a literacy program. Raphael remained silent. His dark eyes never left the image. She returned the wallet to the police within 43 minutes of finding it. Another pause. Most people would not have. That finally earned a response. "I know." The room fell quiet again. One of the investigators cleared his throat carefully. "Should we retrieve the wallet directly from the police department?" Raphael turned toward the window. The city lights reflected across the glass. The wallet is not the priority anymore. Nobody asked what he meant. Years of working around him had taught them when questions were unwelcome. Back in her apartment, Elena kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch. The small one-bedroom unit sat above a laundromat on the north side. The furniture did not match. The kitchen faucet leaked occasionally. But it was home. She opened her laptop and began grading essays while a pot of soup warmed on the stove. Outside, rain started tapping softly against the windows. Around 9 o'clock her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she ignored it. A few seconds later it buzzed again, and then a third time. Elena frowned. Most telemarketers were not that persistent. Finally she answered. "Hello?" For a moment nobody spoke. Then a calm male voice filled the line. "Miss Bennett? Yes, my name is Daniel. I work for a private security firm. Earlier today you found a wallet." Elena sat upright. "Oh, the wallet. Its owner would like to thank you personally." She laughed softly. "That is not necessary, I understand." The man sounded polite, professional. Nevertheless, he would appreciate the opportunity. Elena hesitated. Something about the conversation felt strange. Not threatening. Just unusual. "Would you be willing to meet him?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" Silence lingered for half a second. "Because he insists." That answer did not make her feel any better. She thanked the caller and ended the conversation. Then she stared at her phone for several seconds before shaking her head and returning to work. Somewhere across the city, Daniel lowered his own phone. Raphael sat across from him in a private office and the glow of the skyline beyond the glass. "She refused?" Daniel asked. Raphael's expression remained unreadable. No, she does not trust us yet." Daniel blinked. "Yet." The word hung in the air. Raphael reached toward the desk. The recovered wallet rested beside him. Carefully, he opened it. Hidden beneath a leather compartment was a photograph worn by time. The edges had faded. The colors had softened. Remained unmistakable. Raphael studied her face for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted toward a second object. A folded letter. Old, fragile, protected for years. Neither item had ever left the wallet. Neither item had been seen by Elena, yet something about her continued to pull at a thread he could not quite explain. His fingers brushed the edge of the photograph. "Find out everything," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. "About Elena Bennett?" Raphael's eyes returned to the photograph. "About the woman in this picture." Less than a minute later, another investigator entered the office carrying fresh research files. The room fell silent as he placed them on the desk. One folder had a name typed across the cover. Raphael looked down. For the first time that night, something shifted in his expression. Not shock, not anger, recognition. The investigator swallowed nervously. "Sir, we think there may be a connection." Outside, rain continued falling across Chicago while Elena sat alone grading papers under the warm yellow glow of a table lamp. She had no idea that a forgotten photograph from decades earlier had just connected her life to one of the most powerful men in the city. And she certainly had no idea that by this time tomorrow, Rafael Marino would ask to meet her face to face. Some invitations arrive wrapped in elegance, which only makes them more difficult to refuse. Elena spent most of the next morning trying to convince herself that the strange phone call did not matter. Her classroom quickly gave her other things to focus on. 22 students needed attention. A spelling quiz disappeared. Someone spilled chocolate milk during lunch. One little girl burst into tears because her favorite pencil broke in half. By 3 o'clock, the mysterious owner of the wallet felt far away. Then the front office called her classroom. "Miss Bennett, there is a delivery for you." She frowned. Nobody sent her deliveries. 5 minutes later, she stood at the reception desk, staring at a cream-colored envelope resting on polished wood. No company logo, no advertisement. Just her name written in elegant handwriting. "Looks fancy." Elena forced a smile and took it. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. She waited until the school day ended before opening it. Inside was a simple card. "Miss Bennett, thank you for your honesty. I would appreciate the opportunity to thank you personally. Dinner, 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. The address below. Transportation will be provided if needed. Respectfully, Rafael Marino." Beneath the signature sat an address she immediately recognized. One of the most exclusive restaurants in Chicago. Elena stared at the card for several seconds. She almost laughed. Nobody invited elementary school teachers to places like that, especially not strangers. She folded the card and slipped it back into the envelope. The correct answer was obvious. She was not going. Unfortunately, curiosity can be far more persuasive than common sense. The next evening, she found herself standing outside the restaurant anyway. The building overlooked the Chicago River. Warm golden light spilled through enormous windows. Luxury cars lined the curb. Men in tailored suits stepped through revolving doors while women wrapped in expensive coats disappeared into the lobby. Elena glanced down at herself. Black dress, simple coat, sensible shoes. She suddenly felt very aware of her bank account. Before she could change her mind, the hostess approached. "Miss Bennett?" Elena blinked. "Yes, Mr. Marino is expecting you." Of course he was. She followed the hostess through the dining room. Crystal chandeliers reflected softly against dark wood walls. Conversations remained low and refined. Somewhere a piano played quietly. Then she saw him. Rafael Marino sat alone near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the river. He stood as she approached. Taller than she expected. Dark hair, calm eyes, impeccably dressed without appearing flashy. There was something unusual about him. Not arrogance. Not exactly. Confidence seemed to surround him the way cold surrounds winter. Natural, unavoidable. "Miss Bennett." His voice was smooth and controlled. "I almost did not." To her surprise, a faint smile appeared. "That does not surprise me." He pulled out her chair before sitting across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Elena studied him carefully. He looked younger than she expected. Early 30s, perhaps. Successful, intelligent, the kind of man who belonged in magazines. "You wanted to thank me for returning a wallet." "Yes, most people would have sent flowers." Another small smile. "Most people are not me." The answer should have sounded arrogant. Somehow it did not. Water glasses were filled. Menace arrived. Conversation remained cautious. Raphael asked about her students, her work, the tutoring program. He seemed genuinely interested and detailed. Elena found herself relaxing despite her instincts, yet something still felt unusual, like he was searching for something. Not information exactly, something deeper. Eventually she set her fork down. "All right?" Raphael looked up. "All right? You did not bring me here to discuss reading scores and multiplication tables." Silence settled briefly between them. Outside the window, lights shimmered across the dark river. For the first time all evening, Raphael's expression grew serious. "No," he said quietly. "I did not." Somewhere deep inside, every instinct suddenly became alert. Raphael reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, slowly, deliberately. He placed a small velvet box on the table between them. Elena stared at it. The restaurant around them seemed to disappear. "Mr. Marino?" "Raphael. Raphael." Her voice sounded uncertain now. What exactly is happening? He held her gaze, no hesitation, no embarrassment, no apology. Then he said the last thing she expected to hear. Elena Bennett, I would like you to become my wife. For several seconds she simply stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. The piano continued playing somewhere behind them. Glasses clinked softly across the dining room. The river moved beyond the windows. Everything looked normal. Nothing felt normal, because sitting across from her was a man she had known for less than an hour, a stranger, a powerful stranger. And somehow he had just asked her to marry him. What Elena did not know was that hidden inside a locked drawer less than 2 miles away rested an old photograph containing a face that was about to change everything she believed about her own past. The silence that followed felt heavier than the entire city outside the window. Elena stared at Rafael Marino, searching his face for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding, or perhaps an elaborate social experiment designed by wealthy people with too much free time. She found none. His expression remained calm, steady, almost unsettlingly sincere. Finally she let out a short breath and shook her head. You cannot be serious. I am. We met less than an hour ago. I know you know almost nothing about me. Raphael folded his hands on the table. That is not entirely true. The answer immediately put her on edge. What does that mean? For a brief moment he seemed to consider his words carefully. It means I know you returned a wallet filled with enough money to solve a lot of problems, and you returned it anyway. Elena leaned back in her chair. That is called being a decent person. It is rarer than you think. The restaurant suddenly felt warmer, smaller. The city lights outside blurred against the glass as passing boats moved slowly along the river below. Elena glanced at the velvet box still resting between them. She had not touched it. She had no intention of touching it. Why me? She asked again. This time the question carried more weight. Raphael's gaze lowered briefly before returning to hers. Because I believe you are someone I can trust. Trust enough to marry? Eventually. She almost laughed. That is not how marriage works. A faint smile appeared. I suspected you would say that. For the first time all evening, Raphael looked slightly less composed, not nervous exactly, human. The change was subtle, but Elena noticed it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, not for the ring box, for something else. A photograph, old, slightly worn around the edges. He placed it carefully on the table and slid it toward her. Have you ever seen this woman before? Elena frowned and picked it up. The image showed a young woman standing near a lake. The photograph looked decades old. Sunlight reflected off the water behind her. She appeared to be in her 20s, dark hair, soft smile, kind eyes. Elena's pulse slowed for a second. Then it sped up again. Something felt familiar, not enough to identify, just enough to unsettle her. She studied the face more carefully. No, I do not think so. Raphael watched her closely, too closely, as if her reaction mattered more than her answer. You are sure? Yes. A strange disappointment flickered through his expression before disappearing. Elena looked back down at the photograph. The woman seemed ordinary, the kind of person who might pass unnoticed through a crowd. Yet Raphael clearly viewed the picture as something valuable, important. Who is she? She asked. His answer came slowly. Someone I have been trying to find for a very long time. Elena handed the photograph back. And you think she is connected to me? Silence, not confirmation, not denial, just silence. That alone was answer enough. The pieces did not fit together. A mysterious photograph, a marriage proposal from a stranger. None of it made sense, yet she could feel a pattern hiding beneath the surface. Something larger than what she could currently see. Outside, snowflakes began drifting through the air, the first snowfall of the season, tiny white specks dancing through the glow of streetlights. Raphael carefully returned the photograph to his pocket. I am not asking for an answer tonight. Good. A genuine smile touched his face. I am asking you to consider the possibility that I marry a man I barely know, the possibility that there is a reason our paths crossed. Elena looked away toward the river. Most people would have walked out already, she knew that, but curiosity had always been one of her weaknesses, and Rafael Marino was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, not because of his wealth, not because of his confidence, because every answer he gave seemed to create 2 new questions. Eventually she stood. Rafael rose immediately. Of course. He did not stop her. He did not pressure her. That surprised her most of all. Together they walked toward the restaurant entrance. Snow continued falling outside. The city shimmered beneath layers of white and gold. A driver waited near the curb, but Elena shook her head. Raphael nodded. Then take the train. Another surprise. No argument, no insistence. She stepped toward the door, then paused. I know. I am not even considering saying yes. Raphael's eyes reflected the lights of the city behind her. That is all right. Elena narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Why are you smiling? Because, he said softly, you are still asking questions. She opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself. A second later she turned and stepped out into the snowfall. The cold air hit her face immediately. Across the street, traffic moved beneath glowing signals. Everything looked normal again, yet halfway through her walk to the station she realized something that made her slow down. In all the confusion of the evening she had forgotten to ask the most important question of all. Why had that photograph been hidden inside the wallet in the first place? Some mysteries become harder to ignore the moment they start feeling personal. Elena slept badly that night. Snow tapped softly against the apartment window while questions circled through her mind long after midnight. The photograph kept returning, the young woman by the lake, the way Raphael had watched her reaction. The strange disappointment in his eyes when she failed to recognize the face. By morning she was exhausted. Unfortunately, elementary school students had very little sympathy for exhaustion. The classroom exploded with energy the moment the first bell rang. Backpacks hit the floor, chairs scraped across tile, 22 voices competed for attention at once. Elena threw herself into work, grateful for the distraction. For a few hours, spelling tests and reading assignments pushed everything else into the background. Then lunchtime arrived. She was grading papers at her desk when the school receptionist appeared at the classroom door. Miss Bennett? Elena looked up. Yes, there is someone here asking for you. Her stomach tightened immediately. Who? The receptionist shrugged. An older woman. She says she runs a charity foundation. That a few minutes later, Elena found herself sitting across from an elegant woman in her 60s inside the school conference room. Silver hair, warm smile, impeccable posture. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Collins. She explained that her educational foundation funded literacy programs throughout Illinois. At first, the conversation seemed completely normal. Margaret asked about Elena's students, her teaching methods, the tutoring program she volunteered for twice a week. Then the questions became slightly more personal. Have you always lived in Chicago? Elena looked up. And your family? A brief pause. Just me now. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. You were raised by your grandmother, correct? Elena froze. The woman noticed immediately. I apologize, I did not mean to make you uncomfortable, but the discomfort remained. How did she know that? Elena's grandmother had passed away 3 years earlier. Very few people knew much about her personal life. Margaret smiled gently. We do background research before awarding grants. The answer sounded reasonable, yet something about it felt incomplete. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. The foundation offered a donation to the after-school program. The principal was thrilled. Everyone seemed happy, everyone except Elena. As she watched Margaret leave the building, a strange feeling settled over her. It felt less like a meeting and more like an interview. Across the city, Rafael Marino stood beside the windows of his office overlooking the river. The investigation board behind him had grown considerably. Photographs, documents, old newspaper clippings, church records, school registrations. Most of it seemed unrelated. Daniel entered carrying another folder. We found additional information, Rafael turned. Daniel placed several papers on the desk. Elena's grandmother adopted legal guardianship when Elena was 7 years old. Rafael studied the documents silently. And her mother? Daniel hesitated. Almost nothing. Rafael looked up. Nothing. No death certificate. No confirmed address after 2001. Very little documentation. That caught his attention. Daniel opened another file. There is one more thing. He slid an enlarged copy of an old photograph across the desk. The image showed the same young woman from Raphael's wallet standing beside a lakeside cabin 25 years earlier. Raphael stared at it, then his gaze shifted toward a second image placed beside it, a recent school photograph of Elena Bennett. Different ages, different decades, different lives. Yet similarities were impossible to ignore. The shape of the eyes, the smile, even the angle of the jaw. Daniel exhaled slowly. The resemblance is remarkable. Raphael said nothing. He simply continued studying both photographs. Meanwhile, Elena returned home carrying groceries and lingering questions. The city had turned colder, snow-covered parked cars and rooftops. She climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment building and stopped halfway up. Something was sitting outside her door. A package, small, neatly wrapped, no shipping label, no return address. Her pulse quickened. Slowly she carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. For several seconds she simply stared, then she opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, new, expensive, elegant. Resting on top was a handwritten note. The handwriting was unmistakable. Miss Bennett, every good teacher deserves a place to keep important thoughts. Raphael. Elena closed her eyes, half annoyed, half amused. The man clearly had no concept of normal boundaries. Yet despite herself, she smiled. Then her attention shifted to something hidden beneath the journal, a photograph. Her smile vanished instantly. It was the same woman she had seen at the restaurant, the woman from Raphael's picture. Except this copy contained something new. Written in faded ink across the back were 4 words, "If found, please call." Beneath the message sat a phone number that had not been active in more than 20 years. The past has a strange way of finding people who were never looking for it. Elena sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, turning the photograph over in her hands again and again. The faded message on the back refused to leave her mind. If found, please call. The number beneath it belonged to another time, another life. Snow drifted past the window while the city slept beneath a blanket of white. The journal Raphael had sent remained unopened beside her. For the first time since this strange chain of events had begun, curiosity outweighed caution. The next morning she carried the photograph to school, not because she planned to show anyone, simply because leaving it behind felt impossible. Throughout the day she found herself stealing glances at it whenever she had a free moment. The woman's face seemed familiar in a way that made no sense, not recognizable. Familiar, like a song remembered from childhood without knowing where it came from. By late afternoon, Elena found herself standing outside St. Michael's Church on the north side. The stone building had been part of the neighborhood for nearly a century. Her grandmother used to bring her there when she was little. After her grandmother passed away, Elena rarely visited. The heavy wooden doors opened with a soft groan. Warm air greeted her. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting patches of color across polished floors. The church was quiet except for the distant sound of someone organizing books near the office. Father Thomas looked older than she remembered. His white hair had thinned considerably over the years, but his gentle smile remained unchanged. "Elena Bennett," he said warmly, "it has been too long." She smiled and hugged him. They spent several minutes catching up before she finally removed the photograph from her purse. "Father, have you ever seen this woman before?" The priest adjusted his glasses and studied the image. His smile faded, not dramatically, just enough for Elena to notice. "Where did you get this?" Her pulse quickened immediately. "You recognize her." Father Thomas remained silent for a moment. The church suddenly felt very still. Finally he lowered the photograph. "I have not seen this picture in many years." Elena's heart began beating faster. "Who is she?" The priest looked toward the stained glass windows. Memories seemed to move behind his eyes. Her name was Catherine. Elena stared. The name meant nothing, yet somehow it felt important. "Did you know her?" "A little." Father Thomas spoke carefully. "She volunteered here for a time, many years ago." Elena sat down across from him. "What happened to her?" The priest folded his hands. "That is complicated." Before Elena could press further, the office door opened behind them. A church administrator entered carrying several folders. The interruption broke the moment. By the time Father Thomas returned his attention to her, something had changed. A wall had gone up. A decision had been made. "I think there are people who can answer your questions better than I can." Elena immediately knew who he meant. Raphael. She left the church feeling more unsettled than before. The winter sun was already beginning to set. Long shadows stretched across the snow-covered sidewalks. She had gained almost nothing. A first name, a vague memory, more questions. Meanwhile, several miles away, Raphael stood inside a private archive room beneath one of his office buildings. Shelves filled with old documents surrounded him. Family records, business records, personal records, decades of history carefully preserved. Daniel approached, carrying a thin file. "We found another connection." Raphael accepted the folder. Inside was a church volunteer registry from 25 years earlier. One name had been highlighted, Catherine Bennett. Raphael stared at it. Bennett. The same surname Elena carried today. The same surname listed on school employment records. The same surname her grandmother had used. For several seconds he said nothing, then he closed the folder. "She knows something now." Daniel nodded. Father Thomas recognized the photograph. Raphael walked toward a nearby window overlooking the city's skyline. Dusk painted the horizon in shades of blue and gold. "Not enough. Do you want us to continue investigating?" Raphael's reflection appeared in the glass. Calm, controlled, yet beneath the surface something had shifted. The search that had lasted years was no longer abstract. It had a face now, a voice, a name, Elena Bennett. Across the city, Elena finally reached her apartment building. She climbed the stairs slowly, exhausted by unanswered questions. But as she reached her door, she stopped. A small envelope rested on the welcome mat. No stamp, no address. Just her name written neatly across the front. Her stomach tightened. She carried it inside and opened it carefully. A single sheet of paper slid into her hand. Written across the page was an address. Beneath it were 7 words. Ask about Catherine at this location. No signature, no explanation. Elena stared at the message while snow continued falling beyond her window. Because for the first time since finding the wallet, she had finally been given a direction to follow. Sometimes the truth does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it waits behind one locked door after another. The address led Elena nearly 40 minutes outside the city the following Saturday. Grey clouds hung low over frozen fields while her car followed a narrow road lined with bare trees. The location turned out to be a small lakeside property hidden beyond a row of evergreens. It looked forgotten by time. The cabin was modest, weathered wood, stone chimney, a frozen dock extending into a quiet lake. Elena sat behind the steering wheel for several seconds before stepping out into the cold. Snow crunched beneath her boots. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant water. Whoever had sent the note clearly wanted her to find this place. What she did not know was that Rafael Marino had stood on that same property many times over the years, long before he knew her name, long before a lost wallet connected their lives. The cabin door opened before she could knock. An elderly man appeared, tall, thin, wrapped in a heavy wool sweater. His expression shifted the moment he saw her face. "Good Lord," he whispered. Elena immediately noticed it. Recognition. The same reaction Father Thomas had given. "You know who I am?" she asked. The man continued staring. "You look exactly like her." Her heart skipped. The old man nodded slowly. Minutes later they sat beside a stone fireplace while flames crackled softly against the winter silence. The man's name was Walter Hayes. He had owned the property for decades. Elena listened carefully as he studied the photograph she brought with her. Back then this place was different. More people, more families, more life. Elena leaned forward. "Who was she?" Walter smiled sadly. "One of the kindest people I ever met." The answer somehow felt bigger than a biography. Catherine was becoming less like a mystery and more like a real person. A woman who laughed, worked, helped people, existed beyond a faded photograph. Walter stared into the fire for a long moment before continuing. 25 years ago there was a terrible winter storm. Roads closed, visibility almost disappeared. Most people stayed home. Elena listened carefully. Every instinct told her something important was coming. Walter nodded toward the frozen lake outside. A car slid off the road near the eastern shoreline. Elena's pulse quickened. What happened? The driver survived because Catherine found him. Silence settled across the room. Even the fires reflected the flames. She pulled him out before the weather got worse, called for help, stayed with him until rescue crews arrived. Elena swallowed. "Do you know who the driver was?" Walter slowly nodded. "A young businessman from Chicago. His name was Anthony Marino." The room suddenly felt smaller. Elena recognized the surname immediately. Marino, Rafael Marino. For a moment she forgot to breathe. The accident changed everything. Anthony never forgot what she did, neither did his family. Elena stared at the fire while the pieces began moving into place. The photograph, the investigation, the strange proposal, the questions, all of it. Yet the full picture still remained hidden. "Catherine saved Rafael's father," she whispered. Walter nodded yes. The words hung in the air. Core truths often arrive quietly, not with explosions, not with drama. Just a simple sentence capable of changing everything that came before it. Elena looked down at the photograph in her hands. The woman smiling beside the lake no longer felt like a stranger. She felt connected somehow, important in ways Elena could not yet explain. What happened to her? Walter's expression darkened with sadness. That is the part nobody fully understands. Before Elena could ask another question, Walter stood and crossed the room toward an old cabinet. He opened a drawer and carefully removed a worn envelope. The paper looked fragile with age, protected, preserved, waiting. He returned to the table and placed it gently before her. Elena stared at it. Her name was not written on the front. Neither was Catherine's. Instead, a different name appeared in faded handwriting. Anthony Marino. Walter's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "She asked me to keep this safe if nobody ever came back for it." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the unopened envelope, because for the first time since finding the wallet, she was no longer chasing clues. She was holding one. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Elena stared at it while the fire crackled softly inside the cabin. Outside, the frozen lake stretched beneath a grey winter sky, silent and endless. Walter did not rush her. He simply sat back, flames dance across the stone fireplace. For a long moment, Elena hesitated. The envelope had survived 25 years untouched. Opening it felt like crossing a line she could never uncross. Finally, she slid one finger beneath the seal. The paper opened with a faint crackle. Inside rested several folded pages written in careful handwriting. The ink had faded slightly with time, but every word remained readable. Elena unfolded the first page and began reading. Anthony, if you are reading this, then life turned out differently than I hoped. First, I need you to know that I never regretted stopping that day. I never regretted helping you. Some people spend their lives waiting for a reason to do the right thing. I think the right thing is simply what you do when nobody is watching. Elena paused. The words felt familiar somehow, like advice her grandmother used to give her. She continued reading. I know your family offered rewards, favors. I appreciated the kindness, but I could not accept them. What happened that day was not a transaction, it was a choice. Please do not spend your life feeling indebted to me. The world already has enough people keeping score. Elena swallowed hard. Walter quietly looked away, giving her privacy. The letter continued for several pages. Catherine wrote about ordinary things, the lake, the changing seasons, the importance of kindness. The people she hoped to help someday. No hidden agenda, no secret bargain, only gratitude that another human being had survived. Then Elena reached the final page. Her eyes slowed, her breathing changed, because the tone shifted. If one day I disappear, please do not waste years searching for me. There are reasons I cannot explain right now. Some choices are made for the people we love, even when those choices break our hearts. What matters most is that the people we leave behind are safe. Safe. Something tightened inside her chest. The final lines were even more unsettling. If I ever have a daughter, tell her this. None of it was her fault. For a second, the room disappeared. The fire, the cabin, the lake. Everything faded beneath those 8 words. None of it was her fault. Elena lowered the paper slowly. Her hands trembled. Walter remained silent. He did not need to explain why. The meaning hit her all at once. Her grandmother had spent years avoiding questions about Elena's mother. Every conversation ended the same way. She left. She is gone. Let it go. Elena had grown up believing she had been abandoned, believing someone chose to leave and never come back. Yet the letter suggested something entirely different. Catherine had expected to disappear. She had worried about a daughter she might leave behind. She had wanted that daughter to know she was not responsible. Elena stared into the fire. For the first time in her life, the story she believed about her own childhood began to crack. Several miles away, Rafael Marino stood alone inside his penthouse office overlooking the Chicago skyline. Snow drifted across the city beneath the glow of evening lights. The photograph rested on his desk beside another object, a duplicate copy of Catherine's letter. He had read it hundreds of times over the years. Yet one sentence always stopped him. Some choices are made for the people we love. Rafael understood the words. What he never understood was the choice itself. The door opened behind him. Daniel entered carrying a file. Rafael turned and someone removed it from the cabin records decades ago and returned it 6 months ago. Rafael frowned. Who? Daniel shook his head. We still do not know. For the first time in years, a new question had entered the investigation. Meanwhile, Elena finally folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Her thoughts raced. Catherine had known Anthony Marino. She had saved his life. She had written a farewell letter, and somehow she was connected to Elena's own family history. Nothing felt accidental anymore. As the afternoon light faded outside, Walter stood and walked toward a bookshelf in the corner. He carefully removed an old photo album and carried it to the table. There is something else you should see. Elena looked up. Walter opened the album slowly. Inside were dozens of photographs from 25 years earlier. Families, community events, summers by the lake, birthdays, volunteers, friends. Then he stopped at one particular page. Elena leaned closer. Her heart immediately skipped a beat, because standing beside Catherine in the photograph was a young woman she recognized instantly, not from the lake, not from Raphael's investigation, from her own apartment, a framed picture she had seen her entire childhood. Her grandmother. The most painful discoveries are often hidden inside the people we trusted most. Elena stared at the photograph while the fire crackled softly beside her. Her grandmother stood smiling next to Catherine as if they had known each other for years. Not strangers, not distant acquaintances, friends, close friends. The realization struck harder than any answer she had uncovered so far. Her grandmother had known Catherine. She had known where she had been. Perhaps she had known what happened, yet she had spent an entire lifetime refusing to talk about it. Walter watched the emotions move across Elena's face without interrupting. Outside, snow drifted across the frozen lake while daylight slowly faded behind the trees. How close were they? Elena finally asked. Walter sighed. Very close. Her chest tightened. Then why did my grandmother never tell me any of this? Walter looked toward the window. Because some secrets become heavier with time. The answer only frustrated her more. She spent another hour going through the old album. Every page revealed another connection. Catherine and her grandmother volunteering at community events. Catherine standing beside children during summer programs. Catherine laughing on the dock near the lake. A real person, a life, a history. Yet the final years remained missing. Like an entire chapter had been torn from a book. By the time Elena drove back toward Chicago, darkness had settled across the countryside. Headlights cut through falling snow while questions echoed through her mind. She could no longer ignore Raphael. Whether she liked it or not, he was connected to every answer she was finding. Halfway through the drive, she made a decision. 20 minutes later, she stood inside the lobby of Marino Global Logistics. The building glowed against the winter skyline like a tower of glass and light. She had not called ahead. She had not made an appointment. Yet somehow the receptionist seemed unsurprised to see her. "Miss Bennett," she said warmly, "Mr. Marino is available." Elena narrowed her eyes immediately. "How does everyone keep knowing who I am?" The receptionist smiled politely without answering. 5 minutes later, elevator doors opened onto the top floor. Raphael stood near the windows overlooking the city. Snowflakes drifted beyond the glass. The river reflected thousands of lights below. He turned the moment she entered. Neither spoke at first. Elena walked directly toward him and placed the old photograph on his desk. "My grandmother knew Catherine." Something changed in his expression. Not surprise. The answer stopped her cold. "You know?" Raphael nodded slowly. "I discovered that 2 days ago." Elena stared at him. "And you did not think that was important information?" "I wanted to confirm it first." Frustration flashed across her face. "You keep doing that, knowing things and refusing to explain them." Raphael looked away briefly before meeting her eyes again. "Because I do not know enough yet." Elena laughed bitterly. Silence settled between them. Then Raphael crossed the room and opened a drawer inside his desk. He removed a thin file and placed it carefully in front of her. "Read this." Elena opened it. The first page contained copies of old records. Volunteer registrations, church documents, community service logs, every one of them connected Catherine and her grandmother. Then she reached the final page. Her breath caught. It was a handwritten statement from nearly 20 years earlier, signed by her grandmother. The document was brief, only a few paragraphs, yet one sentence immediately drew her attention. "I promised Catherine I would protect Elena if she could no longer do it herself." Elena stared at the words. Her vision blurred for a moment. The office disappeared around her. All she could see was that single sentence, "Protect Elena, if she could no longer do it herself." Not abandoned, not forgotten, not unwanted. The story she had carried her entire life began collapsing piece by piece. Her grandmother had never adopted her because Catherine walked away. She had adopted her because she made a promise. Elena slowly lowered the paper. Tears threatened but never fell. "She knew my mother." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Raphael nodded. "Yes." Another pause. "I think she was trying to keep a promise." The city lights shimmered beyond the glass while neither spoke. Then Elena looked down at the document one final time and noticed something she had missed. A date. The statement had been signed exactly 3 weeks after Catherine disappeared. Her pulse quickened immediately. Because if her grandmother signed that promise after Catherine vanished, then someone knew Catherine was leaving before it happened. And for the first time, Elena realized there might be one person who understood the truth better than anyone else ever had. Sometimes loyalty means staying long enough to face the truth, even when every part of you wants to run from it. Elena left Raphael's office well after dark. Snow drifted across the city in slow spirals while traffic moved beneath the glow of streetlights. The document remained folded inside her purse. She had read the sentence a dozen times before leaving. "I promised Catherine I would protect Elena if she could no longer do it herself." The words followed her all the way home. They followed her into the elevator, into her apartment, into the quiet hours of the night. By morning, one thing had become painfully clear. Her grandmother had not been hiding a betrayal. She had been carrying a burden. For years, Elena had told herself a simple story. A mother left, a grandmother stepped in, end of story. Now that story no longer existed. The following afternoon, she found herself walking through a cemetery on the edge of the city. Bare trees stretched toward a grey winter sky. Snow covered the ground in soft white layers. Elena stopped before a modest granite headstone. Her grandmother's name rested there beneath a thin layer of frost. For several moments she simply stood in silence. The cold air stung her cheeks. The city felt very far away. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. The wind offered no answer. Yet as she stood there, anger slowly gave way to something else. Understanding. Her grandmother had raised her, protected her, loved her. Whatever secrets she had carried them alone. Elena knelt and brushed snow from the stone. "You were trying to keep a promise." Saying the words aloud changed something inside her. Not forgiveness, not completely, but acceptance. Nearby church bells echoed faintly through the winter air. Less than a mile away, Raphael sat inside his car watching snow drift across the windshield. He had not planned to come, yet somehow he found himself parked outside the cemetery anyway. He never approached, never interrupted. From a distance he watched Elena standing beside her grandmother's grave. The sight stirred an unexpected feeling, respect. For weeks she had been uncovering truths capable of changing her entire life, yet she kept moving forward. Most people would have walked away long ago. Raphael remained where he was until Elena finally returned to her car. Only then did he leave. That evening she found him waiting outside her apartment building. No luxury restaurant, no dramatic gestures. Just a man standing beneath a street lamp while snowflakes settled on the shoulders of his dark coat. Elena stopped when she saw him. Raphael raised an eyebrow. "You asked me that once already." Despite everything, she almost smiled. They walked slowly down the block together. The city felt unusually quiet. Storefronts glowed warmly against the cold. Somewhere a train rumbled through the distance. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Elena finally broke the silence. "I think my grandmother was protecting my mother." Raphael nodded. "I think so too. And I think my mother was protecting someone else." This time he looked at her carefully. "Why?" Eleanor pulled her hands deeper into her coat pockets. "Because nobody writes a letter like that unless they already know they are about to lose something important." Raphael did not answer immediately. His breath drifted through the cold air. "You may be right," they continued walking. The conversation felt different now, less guarded, less adversarial. The mystery still stood between them, but it no longer felt like a wall. More like a road they were traveling together. Eventually they reached a small park overlooking the river. Snow covered the benches. Reflections shimmered across dark water below. Elena stopped near the railing. "Why did you keep searching for her?" Raphael looked out across the river. The answer arrived slowly. "Because my father never stopped talking about her." Elena listened quietly. He believed one act of kindness changed the course of his life. Raphael's eyes remained fixed on the water. "After he passed away, I realized I knew everything about the business he built and almost nothing about the woman who saved him." The honesty surprised her. For the first time, she saw something beyond the confidence and control. A son trying to understand part of his father's story, nothing more, nothing less. Snow settled on the railing between them. The city lights flickered across the river. Then Raphael reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. "There is one more thing." Elena accepted it carefully. The document looked old. Older than anything she had seen so far. Her eyes moved across the page until they stopped at a single line near the bottom. The signature belonged to Catherine. Beneath it was an address. Not a home, not a workplace. A post office box in another state. Elena's pulse quickened, because the document had been dated 2 months after Catherine supposedly disappeared. Which meant one thing. Someone had received a message from her long after everyone believed she was gone. The final pieces of a mystery rarely arrive when people are ready for them. They arrive when there is nowhere left to hide. 3 days later, Elena found herself standing inside a grand ballroom overlooking the Chicago River. Crystal chandeliers glowed above. Hundreds of guests gathered for the annual Marino Foundation Charity Gala. The event raised money for schools, literacy programs, and community outreach projects throughout the state. Months earlier, Elena would have felt completely out of place in a room like this. Now she barely noticed the luxury surrounding her. Her attention remained fixed on the folded document inside her purse. The address from another state, the date, the impossible implication that Catherine had remained alive and in contact with someone after her disappearance. Across the room, Raphael moved through conversations with practiced ease. Business leaders greeted him. Donors sought his attention. Foundation directors thanked him. Yet every few minutes his gaze drifted back toward Elena, not out of obligation, out of concern. The closer they came to the truth, the heavier the answers seemed to become. Later that evening, after speeches concluded and guests moved toward dinner tables, Raphael guided Elena into a quiet private lounge overlooking the river. Snowflakes drifted beyond the glass while city lights reflected across dark water below. Waiting inside was Daniel. A thick folder rested on the table between them. Elena immediately recognized the expression on his face. Something had changed, something important. Daniel opened the folder carefully. "We finally tracked the post office box." Silence settled over the room. Elena sat down slowly. Raphael remained standing window. Daniel continued. "The box was rented under a legal alias. The payments continued for almost 3 years after Catherine disappeared." Elena's pulse quickened. 3 years? Daniel nodded. Whoever maintained the account was extremely careful. He slid several documents across the table. Postal records, forwarding requests, administrative forms. Most meant little to Elena. Then she saw a familiar signature. Catherine. Her hands froze. The room seemed to tilt slightly. She was alive. Daniel exchanged a glance with Raphael before answering. Yes. The single word carried the weight of decades. Elena stared at the papers. All her life she had imagined a woman who walked away. Then she imagined a woman forced into circumstances she could not control. Neither version matched the reality sitting in front of her now. Catherine had remained alive. She had continued writing. She had continued planning. She had continued thinking about the people she left behind. Daniel carefully removed one final document from the folder. Unlike the others, it was handwritten, older, personal. "This arrived through a private archive service 2 days ago," he said. Elena accepted the page carefully. The handwriting matched the letter from the cabin immediately. Catherine's voice seemed to emerge from the paper itself. "If this message is ever found, please tell Elena that I loved her every day I was away." Elena's vision blurred instantly. She lowered her eyes and continued reading. "There are truths I cannot explain. There are promises I was forced to keep, but none of them mattered more than my daughter. If she grows up believing I abandoned her, then I have failed her twice." The room disappeared around her. For several moments there was only the paper in her hands, only the words, only the realization that somewhere years ago her mother had worried about exactly this moment. Raphael quietly crossed the room and sat beside her. He did not need to. Sometimes presence mattered more than language. Elena finally lowered the letter. "She never stopped loving me." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Raphael nodded. "No, she did not." The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Snow drifted across the river. For the first time since this journey began, Elena felt something inside her begin to heal. Not completely, not yet, but enough to breathe. Daniel closed the folder slowly. Both looked up. Daniel hesitated. The final forwarding address connected to the post office box led to a small legal office in Wisconsin. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken again. What does that mean? Daniel slid one final envelope across the table. Unopened, preserved, waiting. It means someone received instructions from Catherine shortly before all contact ended. Elena stared at the envelope, because written across the front in faded ink was a message that changed everything. "To my daughter, open when the truth is finally safe. Some answers do not solve a mystery. They transform it into a memory." The following afternoon, Elena sat beside a large window overlooking the frozen Chicago River. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass while the unopened envelope rested on the table between her and Raphael. Neither had spoken much during the drive. After months of questions, assumptions, and fragments of forgotten history, they had finally reached the last unopened door. The envelope looked ordinary, slightly yellowed with age, the corners worn by time. Yet it contained the final words of a woman whose absence had shaped 2 families for more than 2 decades. Elena carefully ran her fingers along the edge. Her pulse echoed in her ears. Then she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages. The same familiar handwriting she had already come to recognize. For a moment she simply stared. Then she began reading. "My dearest Elena, if this letter has reached you, then enough time has passed for the truth to be safe." The room seemed to disappear. The city vanished. The snow vanished. There was only the voice of a mother speaking across decades. Elena continued, "The story you were told will never explain why I left. Your grandmother agreed to carry a burden that should never have belonged to her. I asked her to protect you because I knew I could not then, not safely." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She no longer tried to stop. Every sentence felt like a missing piece returning to its place. Catherine explained that after years of helping vulnerable families through volunteer work and community outreach programs, she had become involved in a legal situation that required her to leave quickly and quietly. There had been no crime, no scandal, no betrayal. Only a responsibility she believed would place others at risk if she remained. She could not explain every detail. Some records had been sealed, some promises had survived even after all these years. But one thing became unmistakably clear. She had never intended to abandon her daughter. Every decision she made had been guided by a single goal. Protect Elena, the letter continued. Your grandmother wanted me to stay. I wanted to stay. There was not a single morning when I stopped thinking about you. Not one birthday, not one Christmas, not one ordinary Tuesday. If love alone could have solved everything, I would never have left. Elena lowered the letter briefly and closed her eyes. Across the table, Raphael remained silent. The moment belonged to her. The final pages contained something even more important. Catherine described the day she saved Anthony Marino. She called it an accident of fate. A random winter storm, a random road, a random decision to stop and help a stranger. Yet she wrote something that immediately caught Elena's attention. Kindness creates futures we never get to see. If Anthony lived a good life, then helping him was enough reward. If his family found happiness, that would be enough too. Elena looked up slowly. Raphael's gaze remained fixed on the river beyond the window. For years he had searched for answers. For years he had carried gratitude that could never be fully expressed. And now at last he had received it, not through money, not through obligation. Through understanding, Elena returned to the final page. The last paragraph was addressed only to her. Do not spend your life searching for what was lost. Spend it building what remains. The people who stay deserve your attention more than the people who leave. And if someone enters your life with honesty, kindness and patience, do not punish them for mistakes they did not make. Love them bravely. The letter ended simply. I loved you every day, Mom. Silence filled the room after the final word. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the winter clouds, scattering gold across the frozen river. The mystery was over. Catherine had not abandoned her daughter. She had not forgotten her family. She had not disappeared because she stopped caring. She had sacrificed her place in their lives because she believed it would keep them safe. The truth was heartbreaking, but it was also healing. Elena folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. For the first time since finding the lost wallet, there were no more questions left to answer. Only one decision remained, and when she finally looked across the table at Raphael Marino, she realized he was no longer part of a mystery. He had become part of her future. The smallest moments often become the ones people remember forever. Spring arrived slowly that year. Snow disappeared from the sidewalks. Trees along the river began turning green again. The city seemed lighter somehow, so did Elena. Months had passed since the final letter. Months since decades of unanswered questions had finally found their ending. Catherine's story was no longer a mystery. It had become part of the family history Elena carried forward. The grief remained. Some losses never disappear completely, but grief no longer stood alone. It now shared space with understanding, with love, with peace. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Elena stood inside her classroom organizing supplies for the following week. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The room felt exactly the way she liked it. Lived in, real, meaningful. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up and smiled immediately. Raphael stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. I had a feeling you would be working. Elena accepted 1 cup. I had a feeling you would find me anyway. His smile came easier these days. The sharp edges she noticed when they first met had softened. Not disappeared, just softened. They spent several minutes walking through the empty classroom. Raphael stopped beside a bulletin board displaying student essays. 1 paper had been pinned near the center. The assignment asked students to write about heroes. Most essays mentioned athletes, firefighters, or family members. My teacher always helps people even when nobody is watching. Raphael read it twice. Then he looked at Elena. That sounds familiar. She laughed quietly. The sound echoed through the empty room. Months earlier, she would have been uncomfortable under his gaze. Now she simply felt understood. Later that evening, they drove north along the lake. The sun hung low above the horizon. Gold light danced across the water. Eventually, they arrived at the lakeside property where so many answers had been found. The cabin remained unchanged. The dock stretched out over calm water. Birds drifted across the sky. Spring flowers had begun appearing near the shoreline. Elena stepped onto the dock and looked across the lake. The same lake Catherine had once loved, the same lake where countless pieces of the past had been waiting. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned. Raphael stood a few feet away. The breeze moved gently across the water between them. For a moment neither spoke, they did not need to. The silence felt comfortable now. Then Raphael reached into his jacket pocket. Elena immediately laughed. "If that is another mysterious document, I am leaving." He shook his head. No more mysteries. Slowly he removed a small velvet box, the same box she had refused months ago, the same proposal she had once thought impossible, the same question that had begun before either of them understood why their lives had crossed. Raphael looked directly at her, not as a powerful man, not as someone carrying family obligations or unfinished history, just as himself. "The first time I asked, neither of us knew the whole story." Elena felt her heart tighten. "That is true. Now we do." The lake reflected the fading sunlight behind him. The world seemed strangely still. Raphael opened the box. "Elena Bennett, will you marry me?" This time there were no unanswered questions standing between them, no missing letters, no hidden photographs, no unfinished promises. Only two people who had walked through the truth together and chosen to stay. Tears filled Elena's eyes before she even realized it. She laughed softly and nodded. "Yes." Raphael closed his eyes briefly as if absorbing the reality of the answer. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached all the way to his eyes. Months later, family and friends gathered along the river in downtown Chicago. The ceremony was simple, elegant, personal. Sunlight reflected across the water while laughter drifted through the warm evening air. There were no secrets left to uncover, no mysteries left to solve, only a future waiting to begin. As the celebration continued, Elena slipped away for a moment and walked toward the edge of the dock overlooking the river. Raphael joined her shortly afterward. Together they watched the sun sink below the skyline. In her hands rested an object that had changed everything, the old black wallet, carefully preserved. Elena opened it one final time. The faded photograph of Catherine remained inside. Beside it rested something new, their wedding photograph. Two stories sharing the same space, two generations connected by one act of kindness. The breeze moved softly across the water. The city lights began appearing one by one behind them. Elena closed the wallet and slipped it into Raphael's hand. Then she intertwined her fingers with his. The first time she saw that wallet, it had been lying forgotten on a cold sidewalk, while strangers rushed past without noticing it. One small decision had changed everything. The river shimmered beneath the last light of day. The future stretched ahead, and somewhere beyond the fading horizon, a woman who once believed kindness mattered even when nobody was watching had finally been proven right.